which leaves us about 15 minutes to start this topic. We're going to have to pick this up next time, but this is to me is one of the more fascinating topics in corporate social responsibility, which is what is the relationship between stakeholder treatments and profits? How well do I treat my stakeholders, and does that affect, does treating them well make me more profitable or less profitable, right? Because most stakeholder treatment, most instances of treating stakeholders well cost money. Paying employees better costs money. That money, where's that money going to come from, right? Giving cheaper products to customers that cost money versus charging them more. Paying suppliers better versus getting the price down as much as possible for my suppliers. That costs money. So is there a way that even if I'm doing that, I'm making more money anyway over the long term? And the answer, like I said, is it depends. It depends. There are a couple academic studies we're going to talk about here. One is by Michael Barnett, and it's the business case for corporate social responsibility, critique, and an indirect path forward. And Barnett starts with this interesting history. It's between Friedman and Freeman. Milton Friedman is almost a household name. He was a really famous University of Chicago economist who very much advanced the ideology that the business of business is business, right? Like business is in companies are in business to make money. If they make money, they're doing it right. If they're not making money, without breaking the law. I mean, he certainly supported companies meeting the requirements of the law. But other than that, if they're making money legally, and then they're doing it right. And if they're making more money, they're doing it better. And if they're making less money, then they're not doing it as well. And that's the only standard on which we should judge whether companies are successful or not. Whereas Freeman is a scholar who in the 80s brings in and in many ways really develops what becomes the modern stakeholder approach in the scholarship. So I'm going to read a little bit, some quotes from you from the article. Although they are commonly depicted as diametrically opposed, the shareholder and stakeholder perspectives both seek to maximize the profitability of the firm and differ only in the path prescribed to do so. So in this case, the stakeholder approach that the author is talking about is the strategic one, not the normative one, the strategic one. And in that sense, the strategic stakeholder approach is the same thing as the shareholder approach. It just says that we are going to make more money in the longer term if we treat people well. Whereas Friedman was quick to dismiss spending on non-compulsory benefits to employees, suppliers, customers, and the like as tantamount to theft from the firm's owners, Freeman shines a favorable light on the benefits that can accrue to the firm from investing in its relationships with its various stakeholder groups. So this author does is he steps back and says, okay, great, treatment of stakeholders, that's fine. But when we're looking at how that makes profit or doesn't make profit to give benefits, sort of excess pay to employees, excessively generous deals to customers, those sorts of things, we really have to stop and ask, which stakeholders are we talking about? Because that matters. It matters a lot. The business case literature has established only that firms usually benefit from responding to the demands of their primary stakeholders. Firms benefit from responding to the demands of their primary stakeholders. And that makes sense. That makes sense. If you're a customer of a shoe store and you go to the owner of the shoe store and you say, listen, these loafers are really nice. I like these loafers, but I can get basically the same loafers, just a mile or two further down the road for $20 cheaper a pair. Would you sell me these loafers for $20 cheaper? And the owner says, you know what? Yeah, I'm still making profit. I will do that. Because for you, a customer, you're a loyal customer. I want to keep you as a customer. And then another loyal customer comes in with the same question and you give them the same answer. Eventually, you just lower your price so that you're giving a fairer deal, a better deal to your customers. Because otherwise, you're going to lose your customers. that intuitively, that sort of intuitive treat your stakeholders well because you want them to want to continue to have a relationship with you, that makes intuitive sense. And so, of course, we have to treat the primary stakeholders well in order to make a profit in the long term. That only makes sense. The nature of the relationship between the interests of business and those of broader society, beyond a subset of powerful primary stakeholders, remains an open question despite the vast literature. Right, so there's been a lot of research, but it hasn't been designed well enough to tease out whether and when companies make more money by being fair to broader society. Right, not just the immediate community where you have a physical plant, but am I fair to the broader the broader public, the city, the state, the nation. Am I so I'm a power plant, and I'm good to my immediate community, but I managed to find a way to save a lot of money by polluting the river in a way that doesn't affect people until 50 miles downstream. Right. Until and unless my relationship with the government starts to sour and that the EPA comes in and is like, hey, no, you're going to find the heck out of you. Right. Other than that, like, polluting people who are in a completely different community than where my power plant is located, how does that affect my profitability? How does that affect my profitability? And it's hard, it's tenuous. It's hard to establish that. I think the sort of to shorten the argument, the karma type argument of like, it will eventually get back that this is what you're doing. I think that that's an okay argument, but it's not necessarily the strongest argument, and it's really hard to prove. So this graphic is right out of that journal article. I will post this and the next journal article we're going to talk about next time. I'll just post those PDFs as additional attachments to this lecture when I post the lecture online. So the firm actions, what are the company doing that benefits or harms the primary stakeholder relationships? The relationship between those stakeholder relations and your financial returns is pretty easy to establish. And so the relationship between your company's actions and those stakeholders having an indirect effect on your profits, that's fair enough to understand. That's clear enough to understand. Right? If I treat my suppliers well, my suppliers will treat me well. If I treat my suppliers poorly, my suppliers will treat me poorly. And I need my suppliers to treat me well so that I can have good financial returns. I need my company, my employees to want to be there, but for me to have a good sustainable company, right? But the firm's actions up across the top there with the dotted line, where the firm's actions somehow affect broader society, how do those decisions affect your financial returns? And I like that the line is dashed because the research there is just really tenuous. It's hard to establish, and it really also depends on how you ask the question. It really depends on how you ask the question. If you're a company that dodges the heck out of local, state, and federal taxes, you somehow manage to just be you have the most aggressive accountants you can find who just you get out of all of your taxes, and so you basically pay nothing. Does that affect your financial returns negatively in a way that can outweigh the tax savings? I don't know. I mean, it depends. Nationally, maybe not, unless there's a backlash, unless there's a boycott, unless there's a pressure group that comes after you and says, stop shopping here because they don't pay their taxes. And locally, right? Well, I don't know. I mean, how much do you depend on that specific community doing well, right? Are you shorting the schools that are training your employees? And so 10 years from now, 15 years from now, your school, your employees are less useful than they would have been if you'd paid your taxes, and then the schools would have had the money to educate your employees properly. I mean, there are lots of potential relationships there, but it's just a lot more tenuous. It is more of a dashed line instead of a clear linear relationship. And I need Okay, welcome back, everyone. So, as noted last time, this is the one topic. This is the one topic where I'm going to insist on lecturing twice. I really just want to make sure we're all fully on board. How we treat stakeholders is absolutely an essential part of really that runs throughout pretty much the entire semester. It informs so much of our other discussions. So, I just want to make 1,000% sure that you're all fully on board with the fundamentals of the discussion around stakeholders and the stakeholder perspective. So I'm gonna go into a lot of detail here, but a lot of what I'm going to cover is not in the book, and so it is also to some extent like we've just got a certain amount of class to fill. This is a topic I'm really passionate about, and so I'm going to try to bring you in on some of my passion as well. I just wrote a paper on the intersection of stakeholder theory and digital ethics and privacy issues, and so I'm just on fire about this stuff. I love it. I think it's super interesting. I think there's so much to say, and so we're gonna continue where we picked up last time, and then we're gonna talk about a little bit more of the fundamentals the book covers. Then we're gonna go back off on a diversion that I think is really interesting, and we'll try and bring it back together with a bit of a preview on where we're going next time. So remember last time we talked about a study by Michael Barnett, which was about the relationship between how we treat stakeholders and making profits in the long term. And Barnett said that it depends on which stakeholders you look at. And so if you look primarily at primary stakeholders, the folks who can have a really direct and substantial impact on your business, then yeah, of course, treating your shareholders well, treating your employees well, treating your managers well, treating your suppliers well. Obviously, doing those things well gives you a more sustainable set of relationships with all of those people, and that makes your company more profitable in the long term. But the relationship between treating broader society well, treating the environment well, and making more money is less clear. Is just less clear. And I think there's another way that we're going to talk about today in this study that establishes something more of that relationship as well, because they did not because this index that we look at in terms of looking at the relationship for getting ahead of myself a little bit. But some of what we talk about here today does establish at least some relationship between profitability and pro-social corporate behavior in a way that I think at least implies that treating society and the environment well as well will also help you in the long term under certain conditions. And we'll talk about what those conditions are. So Barnett and Solomon ask, does it pay to be really good addressing the shape of the relationship between social and financial performance? And I'll explain what this means as we go. The relationship is U-shaped. The relationship is U-shaped. That's the very short version. But before we even get to that, let me explain the X and the Y graphic on this, the X and the Y measures on this chart here. So the Y measure is return on assets. That says ROA impact, and that stands for return on assets. So it's oversimplifying it to call it profit margin, but just think of it broadly as profit margin. So do you want your company to have 3% profit margin or 6% profit margin or 15% profit margin? Obviously, 15 is better than 6, which is better than 3 if in terms of profit. So that's the y-axis. The vertical axis is basically profit. How much profit is your company making as a share of the assets that are tied up in the company? And the x-axis is the KLD score. Now those are just the first names, the first letter, the first letter of 3 last names of 3 scholars who put together an index that measures pro-social behavior. It's the Kinder, Leidenberg, and Dominy index. The Kinder, Leidenberg, and Dominy index. You don't have to memorize that. You don't have to know those names for the exam. You don't even have to remember that it's called the KLD score. Right? Just think of this as like the x-axis, the horizontal that goes from 0 to 26 here. Just think of that as how pro-social, how socially responsible is a company in a way that's measured by these 3 scholars that developed a scale for measuring pro-social behavior by companies. So as we go from 0 to 26, on the left side, we have companies that are the least socially responsible according to this metric. And on the right at 26, we have the companies that are the most socially responsible according to this metric. Okay, so left to right goes least to most socially responsible. in some ways we could say least to most ethical, at least as measured by these sorts of behaviors that this index takes into account.
Does it stop at 26, or this is just a segment?
I think 26 is about as high a score as they had in the database. So it's not. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how high the index goes. And on the y-axis, it goes from 0 to 16% profits. And like, so similarly, the companies could make. I mean, there are companies that make 100% profit. They make 300% profit. They're rare. If you get to invest in one, do it, right? I mean, if the stock price is right, but the not telling you stock advice. Listen to your finance professors on that, but you get the idea, right? Like, those are highly desirable companies. So it's a sort of a credible, likely range of that we can find companies in on these two measures. So sorry, what's happening there is I'm trying to use the mouse click wheel to scroll through my notes, and instead I'm scrolling through the slides, so I apologize for that. Okay, so the authors write, we find that as a firm's overall net score across the 13 social performance criteria in the Kinder, Leidenberg, and Domini ratings database increases, its return on assets and net income decline at first, reaching a low point at moderate levels of social performance and increase thereafter. The U-shaped relationship is not symmetrical, however. Those firms with the highest net KLD scores, right, these folks over here, had significantly higher return on assets and net income than did those firms with the lowest net KLD scores.
Question?
Yes.
So the return on impact, the numbers there, are there always, in this case, always positive, or these are can be negative too?
So for a given company, they could certainly be negative. I mean, companies can have losses for sure, but this is on average. So this is so like, if you look at a relationship, let's say between education and income, well, there's some people who are unemployed and day trading and losing money and are going to have a net negative income for 2020, right? So like that, but I mean, they're not going to, unless you have a scatter plot where every single person in the study has a dot, right? If you're just talking about an average relationship between the X and the Y, then you're going to wind up with something that's much more like a line. And this line attempts to kind of fit that data. And so, just because you have one person who has negative income, or some companies that have losses, right? They're not going to be on average the companies that are on average at any given point along this continuum. So the average return on asset for somebody with a KLD score of 0 is like 0.065, right? And some of those with a 0 score are going to have a higher return, and some of them are going to have a lower return. But this is an attempt to fit a curve, not a line, but I mean like a single line, a single curve on the average return relative to each KLD score.
Thank you.
Absolutely. That's a good question. So the as you go through 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, that's a kind of a horse latitude, if you will. Of anybody remember the horse latitudes from elementary school history? No, nobody. I used that in conversation the other day, and my girlfriend, who's almost my age, was like, what are you talking about? Okay, so the horse latitudes are this part in the North Atlantic where, before motorized boats, right, when you're just trying to sail across the ocean and you need the wind to get there, it's this part where the wind can sometimes die, and you're just waiting sometimes for days, praying for a gust to come to carry you back to where the current gets stronger and the wind gets stronger. And it's at that point you decide, well, these horses, the horses are for when we get there. We got to get there first. So let's maybe do something not in the horse's best interest to deal with that situation. So you fill in the blanks. You have a couple options there. So the horse latitudes are kind of where you're stuck in. It's a way of saying like stuck in neutral. And so if you're here, if you're down here and you're kind of having let's say you're a 9, and so your return on asset is only 3.5%. Well, if we just stop investing on all the social responsibility stuff, like we could bring our revenue up, our profits up substantially. But if we double down on it, then we could also bring our profits up substantially. And we don't have to go too much further down the social responsibility, the pro-social end of the scale, before we're going to do better with more social responsibility than we could with less social responsibility. And how does this happen? So how do we get there? And the key is what the authors call stakeholder influence capacity. The key to this process is what the authors call stakeholder influence capacity. And so in this first box on the left, we have ethical or pro-social behavior. And what that gets you is credibility and influence. What that gets you is credibility and influence. So imagine that you really care about the rainforest, but you also happen to like coffee, right? There are a lot of different levels of pro stakeholder versus harmful to stakeholder ways that you can grow coffee. And on a KLD 0 type perspective, it's just like, bribe officials, bribe farmers, pull out all the native trees and just plant coffee groves as far as the eye can see. And then there's as you move up in the more sustainable direction, you have shade grown coffee that's sort of grown underneath the canopy. It's more expensive, but you don't have to destroy the whole jungle to do it, and you can do that in close partnership with local farmers. And so some coffee shops really make sure that that their coffee is sustainable, that their coffee is grown in partnership with the local farmers. And some coffee shops, they don't care. I mean, they're just like, put a cute sign out on a chalkboard that makes a pun on mocha or something and try to get you in the door. And then they maybe try to compete on price or something. But there are a lot of people who are going to be really, there are enough people, and it doesn't even really take a substantial portion of the consumer base. It just takes like 3%, 5%, 10% of the consumer base to say, I'm willing to pay a premium for folks who grow their coffee sustainably, for those shops that do that, to be able to charge more of a premium than it costs them to partner with coffee growers in that way. So, especially if you're doing it at scale. So I'll leave it to you to decide whether any given multinational coffee company, not to name names, is doing that truly, or just doing it in a way that's greenwashing. I don't know that story well enough to make that decision, but I know that case makes me feel a little bit more comfortable drinking coffee at that particular coffee shop, because I feel like, I care about the rainforest, and so maybe a nickel more, a dime more for my coffee is fine, but that gets me in that door versus a competitor's door, and so that can bring that coffee chain a little bit more money. And so that influence on consumer decisions, that influence on supplier decisions, that influence on employee behavior and employee decisions, by building good relationships with all these different stakeholders, gets you credibility and influence, so that those people are more willing to work with you, to work for you, to buy from you, to supply for you, those sorts of things, in a way that if you are completely insensitive to their needs, then the only way you can compete is on price and quality, which is a much tougher row to hoe. And this article has a great quote about that from a survey respondent. They found yet another story that did a survey of people, consumers how consumers feel about pro-social behavior by companies. And who was it? We have a King Soopers employee in here who brought this up last time, right? Who is that?
I'm back. I'm sorry. That was me.
Excellent, Bo. Cool. Good. Thanks. If I keep picking on King of Supers, I'd better remember it's you. But for now,
All
thank
right.
you. So you said you feel like King Supers does the right thing,
Yeah.
right? You
I
feel like
mean,
King Supers is a pretty ethical company. And one of the ways, and I'm sure you know the name of the chain that wound up buying King Supers a good number of years ago.
I mean, I just know it as Kroger. That's all.
Kroger. That's it. That's right.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's Kroger's a much bigger. King Super started as a Colorado chain, and then
Mhm.
Kroger is a much bigger national chain, and they bought King
Yeah,
Soopers.
because there's Krogers all over the place,
Yeah, for
but they're
about
all
two.
different. Yeah.
Yeah, about half the country or 2/3 of the country has Kroger's, and they don't have anything like Kroger. It's a very different grocery shopping experience in New York City because the real estate doesn't make any sense up there. Also, they don't have any presence even in that whole region. But so as somebody who was absolutely hooked on the King Supers layout and just grew up doing that, and very used to it. That when I moved out east, I was like, I have to learn a whole different system. I have to learn how to shop at a Key Foods, right? Because it's a different process. Anyway, so this article they found somebody else who did another research study. They found a survey and they pulled a quote out of that to really illustrate what they're talking about here. The survey respondent in this other study says, I guess it depends if the firm's participation in corporate social responsibility is part of the total picture and if they really go out of their way. Like with Kroger, it isn't a one-time shot. They're always doing stuff for Eggleston, which is the children's hospital in the area where this respondent lives. Or they've got the big barrels out there for the people to bring cans for the homeless or something at Thanksgiving and Christmas. It just seems more of a way of business for them continuously. So that in that case, that's fine. But if somebody's doing it just for the publicity, then that would not make me think better of them. Right. So if King Supers just did this every so often, if the Krogers of the world just did this every so often, then you're like, meh, that's nice, but that's not going to change my buying behavior. Like I'm not going to buy into it. And so it's only the credibility and influence that we get from long-term sustained engagement with stakeholders, including something like the community, like what this story is talking about, that we get this kind of credibility and influence. And that's what gives us the extra profits. That's what gives companies the extra profits, is they have the ability to go in to a community and have those relationships be stronger and go better. And I want you to think about all of the different, very, very small, different decisions that we can make. It's not just about getting more people in the door. Getting more people in the door is almost surely the primary way that this works out. But think about all of the different stakeholder relationships that a company has that we went through last time, right? And then for each of them, how can this stakeholder have an influence on you? How can this stakeholder have an influence on you? How can this stakeholder have an influence on you? So, if every Thanksgiving and Christmas, 9 News or, Channel 4 News or Fox 31 News, they know that you're a key part of doing the charity food drive around the holidays that year. Then in February, if something goes bad and you've got a negative news story that's going to come out in the press, those same reporters, those same editors, they're humans, right? They're going to remember your role in the community, and that'll maybe take a little bit of their foot off the gas a little bit in terms of pursuing the negative news story of you. When it's time to get a permit approved for your new store, is the county going to be easy on you, or is the county commissioner going to be hard on you and sort of make you bend over backwards to dot every I and cross every T? Or are they going to be a little bit forgiving, and is it going to be a little bit easier to get a permit there? There's always, in all of these things, in all of these areas, how the media treats you, how regulators treat you, how your suppliers treat you, there are always so many little gray areas where actual humans have an impact that makes your life a little bit harder or a little bit easier. And you always, if you can, want them to be making your life a little bit easier, just one small item at a time, one transaction at a time. I don't know of any negative stories coming out about King Supers, by the way. I'm just picking an example of a stakeholder that can have an impact on a company's bottom line. But when we have that credibility and influence, because we have good relationships with all of our different stakeholders, then each of those other things that can happen to our company can be a little bit easier or a little bit harder. And if we have those good relationships, they're going to be a little bit easier. And so these are often in ways that we don't foresee. These are often in ways that we don't plan on. It's hard to draw a straight line where, like, my actions in February, it's February 3rd, 2021. So by making this decision on February 3rd, 2021, I know for sure that in July of 2022, X is going to be easier for us, or we'll have Y more customers. Like, you don't know that. we don't, it's really, really hard to establish and quantify that. But over time, those small little advantages add up enough that the right side of that U curve winds up being higher. The right side of that U curve winds up being higher. So you invest, and but that also explains that mechanism. That previous slide also explains why the curve is U-shaped in general, right? So like if you only make modest investments in social responsibility, if you only make modest investments in giving back to the community, if you're uneven, like sometimes you'll do this drive, but then the next year maybe you'll skip it. Sometimes we give bonuses to employees. Sometimes we're really stingy with employees, even though it's a good year. Sometimes we're good to suppliers. Sometimes I'm a jerk to suppliers. Then that uneven record, that mixed record, isn't really going to get you the kind of stakeholder influence capacity that's going to make your life easier on all of those when you have all of those different interactions. But if you consistently, go above and beyond what's required by the law by trying to be a good partner in the community, by trying to be a good partner with all of the people you have direct financial relationships with, then over time that makes those relationships so much stronger that it makes your life so much easier, that the net profit to be made is higher than if you just didn't invest at all. So partial investment is less effective, but a full investment in corporate social responsibility over time for most companies and most sectors really will have some really important payoffs. Any questions about this study?
I just have a question about the example you gave us where they were talking about how specifically in their area, like, they're always good all the time. It's not just to save face something happens. So does that mean that ulterior motives only really play if it's not all the time? Like if the company is doing something good just to try and save face because they did something bad, then obviously that's not great, right? But like if the company is always doing something good and it's so that people don't look at them badly, does that make them a good company or a bad company? Like if they like I'm having a hard time drawing like an example of a company that
sure
kind of plays that.
So your question is, does intention matter?
Right. Like if I do something great all the time, I'm giving millions of dollars a year to hospitals, but it's so that people don't look at something I'm doing somewhere else. Like you are ethically doing that good thing, but it's so that it has bad intentions. Does that make you a bad company, or does that make you a good company based on where you fit on that spectrum?
I think it depends on whether it's, and I think the intention versus outcome difference is less important than consistent versus erratic, or infused through everything that you do versus like a Band-Aid slapped on negative behavior. Right. Like
right.
Andrew Carnegie gave away a lot of money, but as a business person, we could spend a whole semester picking on Andrew Carnegie, right? Because there was a lot of
Rockefeller,
Rockefeller, yeah, absolutely, a lot of ethically questionable behavior that led to those millions and millions back when a million was like a crazy amount of money.
Well, yeah, and now it's like you have Jeff Bezos who apparently is stepping down, which is crazy. But like people like Jeff Bezos or Amazon now, like Amazon makes so much money and does so many things that like people question that they're killing small businesses. They're doing all these negatives, but they help out in so many ways by giving money back, providing work in all these areas. They do all these programs. So it's like, is Amazon a good or a bad company? Because they universally do these good things, but they also kind of suck. So,
I mean, I think it kind of depends. I think it kind of depends on who you ask, right? And so who, if I'm running a local charity, then Amazon is giving me 20% of my annual budget, like I'm pretty pro Amazon all of a sudden. But like, is my opinion enough in the community to make up for all the people who like, oh yeah, my aunt's shop had to shut down because nobody bought books from her anymore, that sort of thing. So
that's kind of my question. Really, like, how do you qualify a lot of these things? Because I feel they are either country to country, city to city, individual to individual, but there's always it's a lot of gray area because it is who you're talking to. Like, so I just was, if there's like a universal that we just accept, this is good, this is bad, there's some black and white to this topic, or if it's all gray.
I mean, I think there probably is a lot of everyone would agree that that's a pro-social move, or everyone would agree that that's a you know, a socially harmful move. I think Amazon does okay with a lot of people, but in large part because a lot of people are really comfortable with whatever happens as the result of competition is fine, right? And so there, I think there is a less universal opposition to sort of, you know, small businesses losing in this context, in this contest, right? Then, and so I know a lot of people who do, but a lot of people like, I don't, you know, I mean, if they can't compete with Amazon, they can't compete with Amazon. That's capitalism, right? And maybe that's that person's values, and in some ways that's, I mean, that's also an important social value in for our broader society. So I don't, I mean, I think the relativity of it does highlight that we have to look at, you know, which stakeholders are involved and how, you know, and how does it affect those stakeholders. I mean, I think most customers continue being customers with Amazon because Amazon is pretty good to their customers as customers,
Right.
right?
Well,
I mean, especially if you go with like Prime and the credit card, so you're getting 5% back on everything, and then everything. I mean, they just like, you know, you can't get them to not give it to you in a day. You're like, no, I don't need this until 2 weeks from now, and then it's still there in 3 days. You know, like
Right.
they're you know, really focused on that relationship just as a business relationship, and so in some ways maybe that outweighs. And so I mean, I think it depends on the subjectivity of the people involved. I think it depends on the you know, who has the power in these relationships, right? And so Amazon has, you know, if you're we're going to talk about later in the semester, one of the things we're going to talk about that Amazon did is they've been taking data about third-party seller products and using that data in a way that they say in their agreement with these parties that they're not going to do this. They take that data and use it to make products that are exactly the same and then undercut the competitors, right? And so that, you know, Amazon Basics products are often based on like, oh, this, we sell a lot of this, so let's develop that and sell it instead of letting this person make all the profits. And that's, I mean, I think that is pretty clearly anti-competitive. I think they're in the process of being sued, and I think they're gonna have to at minimum settle around that one, right? And so like, but that's the supplier relationship. The answer to that question, how much power does this stakeholder have over us versus how much power do we have over them? I mean, it's like, you know, it's like an elephant versus a fly in terms of the weight that they carry. So, I mean, they're not that worried about their supplier relationships, but, you know, at least no small set of them is really a problem for them. Whereas their customers overall is really important to them. So which stakeholders really have the power in this relationship? I think that's also really important to them.
I think the other thing though, like, is the stakeholder double standard, because like if you look at like Amazon and Walmart do basically the same thing.
Yeah.
As far as how they affect a community. They come in, they remove anyone that can't compete against them, and then they take over. But if you listen to the way people who actively go to both Walmart and Amazon talk, Amazon's great, we love Amazon. Walmart's garbage, you should shop local. And I think it's such a strange, and I guess that's really what I was getting at with my if you do good things all the time, does it override you being a bad company? Because you're doing them so that people don't look at your bad spots. Because Amazon is great to their customers. They're great with customer service. If you need problems, they're great with helping things. They do all these things. They facilitate small things in communities. But they also are kind of ruining small business in America. They're making all these other problems. And Walmart does the same thing, but people hate Walmart. And you can't really cover the negatives that the Waltons do because they're terrible. But like I just think it's an interesting dynamic of how we view something based on like what they're showing us, because Walmart doesn't really do the same things, or they're not broadcasting money they're giving away or whatever. So it has this terrible reputation, but they function as the same entity, I guess, in any given situation. They're the super business that provides whatever you need.
Sure. So yeah. So maybe there's a little bit of you know, not the ecological version, but a little bit of sort of, you know, community involvement equivalent of greenwashing going on, and maybe that's kind of effective in helping ameliorate some of those criticisms against Amazon. I think that's fair. I think that probably is some of what's happening. I think there's a lot of other stuff going on. I have a lot of socio-political opinions about why Walmart has the connotations that it does. I'm happy to talk to you offline about that. I, as a somebody who's studied, spent years studying political communication and decades studying U.S. politics, I have a lot of opinions on this stuff. We could talk all day. So, I think that there's something to what you're saying for sure. I think absolutely.
Sorry to get off topic and derail.
No, that's good. That's good. And how do you weigh different treatment of different stakeholders? I mean, like I really like that a small chunk of all of my purchases at Amazon go to MSU Denver, right? I just set it up that way, and so I think we're a desperately underfunded state institution, and I'm willing to use my a little bit of purchasing power when given the option to do that, to try to help give us a little bit of money back. So, I mean, I've probably raised dozens of dollars. It's not enough to make a difference, but I mean, like I like that, and that maybe that does make me feel a little bit better about shopping at Amazon, and I'm happy to shop at Walmart too. I mean, I'm not dissing Walmart, but I think you're right. I think there's a different feeling there, and that probably is part of that.